I don't understand why there is all this controversy about laws banning homosexual marriage. What don't you understand? Well, look, if people choose to be homosexual, that's up to them. I mean, that's their choice, and it's not a choice, of course. People don't choose to be gay any more than you or I chose to be straight, whatever. They're going to go to hell because of it, but that's not my problem and they can do what they want. I don't think it should be illegal for one guy to fuck another guy. But what I don't like is a bunch of liberals and activist judges trying to force me to accept homosexuals getting married. That threatens my traditional marriage. How? Well, it just does. How? It does, that's all. In what way? In every way. Such as what? Well, homosexuality is against my religion, but if homosexuals could get legally married, my church would have to perform homosexual weddings, even if they're against our religion. Bullshit. That's what they told me in church. But that's bullshit. We were told that if the law allowed homosexuals to marry each other and our church refused to do it, we could be sued. Bullshit. Listen, not that it really matters, but what religion are you? I'm a Mormon. Okay, I'm an atheist, but let's pretend for purposes of this discussion that I'm a Mormon too. My girlfriend is a Jew. Let's say we got engaged and wanted to get married in your church. Would you let us? Well, would your girlfriend be willing to renounce Judaism and become a Mormon? No. Then no, we couldn't do that. We only perform marriages between two Mormons in our church. Why? Because that's what our religion requires. Well then, could I sue you? Of course not. Why not? You couldn't sue us just for refusing to perform a marriage that's against our religion. You're right. I couldn't sue you. Okay, well then suppose my fiancé was also a Mormon. A Mormon man. Would you want to marry us in your church then? No, we wouldn't want to do that, because performing a marriage between two men would be against our religion. But like I said, if we didn't, you could sue us. So we agree that I could not sue you for refusing to perform a marriage to a woman that violated your religion, but you somehow believe that I could sue you for refusing to perform a marriage to a man that violates your religion? How in the hell can you believe that? Because that's what they told us in church. Well, that's bullshit. I'm talking about marriage, which is a government-controlled civil legal matter, and you're talking about holy matrimony, which is a religious matter. Don't confuse them. Religious groups are free to refuse to conduct wedding ceremonies that violate their religious beliefs. I mean, hell, the First Amendment protects your church's right to discriminate against people who don't share their religious views. But that doesn't mean the government has the right to discriminate against people without any good reason for it. If your church wants to refuse to marry gay people, that's their right. But that doesn't mean it's okay for the government to also discriminate against them and refuse to allow them the legal right of civil marriage. But if you allowed homosexual marriage, wouldn't you also have to allow polygamy? No. Though as a Mormon, I would think you would view that as a benefit. If you allowed homosexual marriage, wouldn't you also have to allow a guy to marry his sister? No. Jesus, where do you come up with this shit? Wouldn't you have to allow a guy to marry a 10-year-old? Or his dog? Or his car? Don't take this the wrong way, but I have to ask. Are you retarded? Well, you said that the government can't discriminate against homosexuals who want to get married. So what makes you think it could discriminate against those groups? Let me try to explain this slowly. First, you have to understand what our Constitution says. I know one thing, it doesn't say that homosexuals have a right to not be discriminated against. Actually, it does. No, it doesn't. It doesn't even mention homosexuals. I read it. It doesn't say it in so many words, but it does say it. For one thing, the 14th Amendment says that the government can't deprive people of equal protection under the law. For that last 140 years or so, the Supreme Court has said that doesn't mean that the government can never discriminate against a group. But if it does discriminate against a group, there has to be a damn good reason for it. It has to serve a government or societal interest to discriminate against that group. Like what? Well, for example, the DMV couldn't decide that it would never give driver's licenses to, let's say, Mormons or gay people, because there's no government reason to discriminate against them that way. But the DMV has decided to discriminate against people who are blind and refuse to give them driver's licenses, and that's obviously okay. There's a good reason for that, and we wouldn't want it any other way, okay? So, it's not a real tough standard the government has to meet, though it does have to meet some standards. For ordinary discrimination, not involving things like race or gender, all they have to do is show that there is some rational basis for the discrimination and that it's rationally related to a government interest. So what makes you think they can discriminate against people who want to have multiple wives? The government would say that their primary purpose in legally recognizing marriage is to provide order and stability to legal affairs. It means there is one person to inherit property if you don't have a will, one person to make decisions for you if you are sick or dying, one person to be responsible for your debts if you can't pay, and so on. That policy would be defeated if there were competing claims and multiple spouses arguing, for example, about whether to pull the plug if you get a brain injury. You or I might not fully agree with the government's theory about that, but as I said, it doesn't take much, and that would probably be enough to say there was a rational basis for discriminating against polygamists. So why can the government discriminate against a guy who wants to marry his sister? Have you ever been to Arkansas? That should answer your question. Incestuous marriages can produce inbred mutant kids, which the government often has to take care of. It seems like the government has an interest in banning them. What about discriminating against a pedophile who wants to marry a little kid? Or a guy who wants to marry his cat? Or his car? Seriously, are you retarded? I think you can think of your own reasons why the government would say it has an interest in preventing kitty diddlers from marrying their victims. But more fundamentally, with respect to kid fuckers, horse fuckers, and tailpipe fuckers, marriage is a lot of things, but one thing it is a legal contract. Little kids don't have the legal capacity to enter into contracts. Neither do animals. Neither do inanimate objects. Speaking of horses, it makes you look like a horse's ass to pretend not to understand this. Stop it. Well, so, answer this for me. What legitimate government interest does it serve for the government to discriminate against gay people in the right to get married? It's against my religion. Advancing your religious beliefs isn't a government interest. We have a whole different amendment to the Constitution that talks about that. I think it's morally wrong. Your personal moral beliefs aren't a government interest, though, all right. I don't like homosexuals. They make me uncomfortable, and they don't share my values. Well, a lot of people don't like Mormons. What would you think if someone stood up and gave a speech like this? I hereby propose a state constitutional amendment invalidating Mormon marriages in this state. As polygamists for decades, Mormons historically have shown a complete disregard for the traditional marriage of one man and one woman. Plus, I gotta say, and I hope this doesn't sound bigoted, Mormons as a group make me uncomfortable, and I don't share their values. For example, they're always pumping out houses of kids, an environmentally irresponsible practice, riding around on bikes with white dress shirts and black ties to knock on my door, and try to give me a copy of the Book of Mormon, wearing funny underwear, never drinking coffee or booze, posthumously baptizing Holocaust victims as Mormons against their descendants will, and so on. These are not traditional American values, and I do not approve of these people cheapening my traditional marriage by claiming to be married like normal people. Not to mention that these Mormons are always pushing their Mormon agenda on the rest of us and trying to recruit others, including even children, shamefully enough to share their Mormon lifestyle choice. Of course, as the biggest backers of Prop 8, Mormons have signaled to us that it's acceptable for me to discriminate against groups who don't share my values and whose lifestyles I find objectionable. Given their historical disregard for traditional marriage, I feel this is a cause we should all get behind. I mean, what if our schools were required to teach that Mormons used to engage in polygamy, and that in fact some offshoot Mormon groups still do? Do we want our schools teaching our kids that it's okay to have multiple spouses? Protect traditional marriage and stop Mormon marriage. Of course, this doesn't discriminate against Mormons in any way, because they still will have the right to marry anybody they want, as long as it's not another Mormon. If they really want to live with another Mormon, of course, they can live in sin as domestic partners, just don't confuse that sort of thing with traditional marriage. But that would be wrong. The government wouldn't have a legitimate reason for discriminating against Mormons in marriage rights like that. The government can't discriminate against us just because some people don't like us. You're correct, of course. Now, let me ask you again. What legitimate government interest is there in discriminating against gays in their marriage rights? Well, let me get back to you on that. I won't hold my breath.